Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Public Safety Committee meeting for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. I am joined today by my colleagues, David Rue. Okay. David Rue and Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell and Councilmember for the 12th District, John Lee. We do have a number of public speakers on the signed up for multiple comments, multiple items. So we will start with Beltry Depot. Okay, not seeing anyone on that. Corey Schmidt. Corey Schmidt. Okay, Corey is not here. Mr. Flint. Oh, where's Corey? Okay, Corey, come on up. Okay, Mr. Schmidt, you're welcome to take your multiple items now, or are you going to forfeit? Okay, so we will forfeit the multiple speaker card on that. The Reaper, Mr. Previn. Mr. Previn, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. It's Eric Previn from Studio City and CD2. Our senior lead officer is Sean Smith. We have some Vision Zero issues in our neighborhood, and I know that's on your agenda today. You're looking at getting sworn overtime to enforce. We're not the area where I think you're imagining, which is a little further in the West Valley, or maybe out by your neck of the woods, where you have just an astonishing number of people being run down regularly. But enforcement is one part of the story, but it's not going to get you what you need. And one of the bigger concerns is, before we start spending sworn overtime ticketing people, I'm very concerned that in Studio City proper, on Whitsett and Colfax, we have jacked up the speed limits from 35 miles an hour to 40, which puts just regular Angelenos who ride bikes, who are pedestrians, who drive cars, in a dangerous situation. Now, we did that with our eyes wide open. There's no requirement to do that. We did it because we had to do it for that ridiculous set of laws that make it that you, in order to cite people, you need to show you did a recent traffic study. So we showed that people go a little too fast, and then we jacked up the rates. The problem is that we're just waiting. It's a ticking clock. We're going to run down somebody. And now Harvard Westlake, so David Rule, will pay attention, are going to come into the neighborhood and set up egregiously an enormous athletic facility on our currently publicly accessible recreational facility called Weddington Golf and Tennis. We don't want those kids to be killed, because those are the valuable kids. So I beg you, think twice before you spend sworn overtime ticketing people for driving too quickly. What we really need to do is create safe zones where people can't go that fast, where there's a light that requires them from picking up so much speed, and where we have illuminated spots. There's the one thing that goes blink, 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 blink when somebody walks into the street. That's the best one, because people automatically see.
Okay, now we're going to go into your 1 minute general public comment.
Okay, my 1 minute general public comment. Mr. Schmidt walked in just a minute ago, and then he deferred because it's hard to speak when you just get. The problem with selecting meeting times that overlap, which you've done, I don't know if you did it, but someone did it. This one's at 3, and now there's a planning one at 3, so they collide. And at 1 p.m. today, you have transportation and Mr. Rue's stately committee and Mr. Lee's embarrassment of a committee. Those 3 committees all meet at 1 p.m. Now, Mr. Lee, after 30 seconds, seeing nobody in the room, even if they're signed up, says, that's it, we're done, meeting over, which is an egregious violation of the Brown Act. So no, I don't want to go before a judge and undo all this, but that's what we're going to have to do, unless you're going to agree to take people who have points on record, want to make their comments onto the record, and if they're around the corner and you know it, you don't close the meeting like John Lee did today, which is a shameful act of denial. And he could say, oh, well,
Thank you
weren't
very
there.
much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We also have someone by the name of Scorch that signed up for multiple items. Okay, seeing none, that concludes the multiple item comment cards. Colleagues, I'd like to recommend that we take items 4 through 20 on consent. No objection. Seeing no objection, that'll be the order. And and would like to call up item number 1, please.
Item number 1, motion Rodriguez-Lee relative to the status of Vision Zero enforcement efforts and the use of sworn overtime allocated for its purpose in the 2019-20 adopted budget.
Good afternoon, Commander Lewis.
Good afternoon, ma'am. How are you?
Good to see you. Hi. Go ahead.
I'm here with my colleague, Anne-Marie Sauer from Fiscal Operations Division. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So colleagues, just to introduce this item, I know as many of you are aware, we have been engaging in active efforts in partnership with the Department of Transportation and LAPD collectively to implement Vision Zero. In my area, and I know this has been an alarming trend in a number of, in certain bureaus specifically, where we have seen a spike and an increase, even with some of our Vision Zero efforts, some fatalities and pedestrian-related injury, vehicular injury, and caused injuries. And every year we're seeing more than 200 individuals that are killed that are traversing through our city. And given some of the most recent increases that we've seen in my district, the conversation that I wanted to engage in here was some of the efforts that how our overtime usage is being leveraged and implemented in areas, given that we've seen some of the spikes in this activity, how that's being aligned and how those resources are being aligned with respect to the efforts that we are engaged in and as it relates to Vision Zero and the high injury networks. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to you, Commander Lewis, and just kind of talk about, I know since some of the restructuring, what the process is as it relates to some of the bureaus and some of the divisions, how they are actively kind of leveraging overtime usage to address some of these increases.
Yes, ma'am. So just as an overview, in 2015, the mayor signed Executive Order number 10, which implemented citywide Vision Zero initiatives to eliminate all traffic fatalities in the city of Los Angeles by 2025. The first funding for Vision Zero occurred in the 2017-2018 budget cycle, where the department gave a carve out of $1.5 million. At the time, that was 1.2% of our overtime budget. In 2018-19 budget, they also received $1.5 million, which was 1.3% of the budget. For the 2019-20 department budget, we also received $1.5 million, which was 0.9% of the overtime budget. The 1.5 is a carve out. It's not extra funds. It's part of the department's regular budget. The Mayor's Vision Zero initiative tasked the department as well as DOT with prioritizing engineering and traffic surveys to increase speed enforcement efforts on the high injury network. In order for an officer to issue speeding citations, the law requires that the roadway have a valid engineering and traffic survey. In 2015, when we started Vision Zero, only 81% of all the engineering traffic surveys were, 81% of them were expired. As a result, speed enforcement efforts were hampered due to the expiration of those surveys. By January 2019, all surveyed streets were updated through the support of the Public Safety Committee as well as LODOT in getting those surveys completed. The following is an annual accounting of our speeding citations. In 2015, when we started Vision Zero, the department wrote a total of 19,296 speeding citations. In 2016, we saw a fall off of about 6%, where they wrote 18,099 speeding citations. In 2017, that number rose to 25,288 speeding citation, an increase of almost 40%. In 2018, that number grew to 25,839, an increase of a little over 2% from the previous year. Year to date, we've written 27,887 speeding citations. Currently, the department has 589 speed measuring devices. 237 of those are radar. 352 of them are LiDARs.
I'm sorry, are what?
LiDAR machines, which is a more specific. Radar covers a wide range. LiDAR is a light specific that tells you directly, like, that vehicle is the one that's speeding, as opposed to radar gives you a wide range and tells you that there's a vehicle in that area that's speeding.
And what's the ratio again? You said 237 radar, and how many of those?
237 radar and 352 LiDAR machines. In order to shoot LiDAR, they have to go through a 40-hour school, and we run 4 of those each year. This year, we've certified 75 new students, and we've acquired 30 new devices on the old STEP grant that we had last year. As of October 2019, traffic fatalities and all collisions have decreased. The following is an overall of our fatalities and severe collisions throughout the city of Los Angeles. Operations Central Bureau had a 13% decrease as it relates to fatalities, but their severe injuries have increased 22%. Overall, their collisions are down 1%. Operations Central Bureau had a decrease of 18%, 47 fatalities, a decrease of 20% for their severe collisions, and overall an increase of 1% for their overall traffic collisions. Operations Valley Bureau had a 5% decrease in their fatalities. Their severes have increased 2%, and their overall they had a reduction of 2% for their overall collisions, 13,610. The area that we've struggled in for the most part for the year is Operations West Bureau. They had an increase of 20% in their fatalities. Their severes have increased 16%, 233 severes, and overall they had a reduction of 2%. Obviously, we're concerned about the fatalities in West Bureau. As of October 5th, the pedestrian collisions have decreased. However, pedestrian fatalities and severe collisions have increased. The following is an overview of all the pedestrian collisions in the city. Operations Central Bureau is down 4% for their pedestrian fatalities. Excuse me. For their pedestrian collisions, the severe pedestrian collisions have increased 64%. Operations South Bureau, their pedestrian collisions, they had an 11% reduction and a 30% reductions in their severes. Valley Bureau, 16% reduction. However, their severe injuries were up by 9%. Operations West Bureau, which is the area that I discussed earlier, had a 110% increase in their pedestrian fatalities and a 14% increase in their pedestrian severes. As of October 5th, 2019, their bicycle fatalities and total bicycle collisions have decreased. However, bicycle severe collisions have increased. The following is an overview of all bicycle collisions throughout the city. Operations Central Bureau is flat as far as their fatalities. The severes are up 9%, and their overall collisions are up 1%. Operations South Bureau is also flat as far as bicycle fatalities with 4. The severes are down 26%, and overall their bicycle collisions are down 17%. Operations Valley Bureau is down as far as bicycle fatalities 17%, but their bicycle severes are up 22%. Overall, bicycle collisions are down 6% in Valley Bureau.
So if I can interrupt you for a second, because I do have a quick question. So I know within the, for the bureaus, we're seeing kind of the averages, but we know which divisions we're seeing the most significant spikes, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so among those divisions, how are we aligning some of the resources, or have we identified a trend amongst some of those locations, and what has been the coordinated response to address it?
So what we did was we took a data-driven approach to it. We looked at the statistics of when the collisions were occurring, days of the week, time of day, and as well as who were the people that were involved in the collisions. And we allocated our hours based on that data. And we broke down the Vision Zero. We had a total of 17,740 hours, and those hours were broken up. Central traffic was given 2,968 hours. South traffic was given 2,800 hours. Valley traffic 4,200 hours, and west traffic 3,472 hours. Traffic group received 2,990 hours, and you'd note that west traffic received 3,472 based on the trend that we were seeing when we looked at the data as far as how they were trending in the beginning of the year. Each traffic division as well as traffic group, they prepare a schedule of Vision Zero details, the GP prior, and after those details are worked, the recap is given, is turned in, and it's analyzed, and we look at it to see what look at it for measures of effectiveness to see if we put our details in the right places and what the impact, what the results were of our efforts. We also, there's a coordinated effort as far as our enforcement. Besides looking at the data, there's weekly meetings between myself and the traffic commands where we're talking about these things as they're happening in real time.
Mm-hmm.
I attend the direct reports meeting, which is with Office of Operations. So all the information as it relates to traffic enforcement and traffic trends is exchanged on a weekly basis with my colleagues in operations, so that everyone is having that Vision Zero conversation in real time, and they understand the importance of us all having a role in not only the enforcement, but the education piece of it as well. I attend ComStat every week, so there's someone sitting at the table. I had ComStat this morning. There's someone sitting at the table asking questions and querying the patrol commands as far as their efforts as it relates to Vision Zero. So I'm asking the questions as far as not only if they're writing citations, what they're writing for, because we want to make sure that the officers are not writing to write them. They're writing those sections that, if we don't, result in people losing their lives. Speed is the primary one. So there's a real effort to drill down on what our folks are doing, keeping the exchange of information. The traffic captains are required to get on a seesaw call with operations. So there's not only a conversation daily about crime, the traffic is infused. We're making sure that the officers, when they go out in the field each day, they each have a traffic mission along with their crime mission. And then that information is looked at on a weekly basis with my meeting with the traffic captains to see if we're gaining some traction in what we're doing from an enforcement standpoint. The traffic captains are also required to be fully engaged with the community. So there's a community calendar that is produced every month, and they go out and they're doing, the coffee with the captain. They're doing roll calls in the street in those areas that are impacted. They are attending community events. We've done things like when we were seeing spikes with bicycle collisions, we attended Cyclavia and had traffic booths there so we could educate the community. I've also encouraged them to piggyback with their peers in the command. So when we meet the community and we're having a conversation about crime and hearing their concerns, we're infusing that traffic message and Vision Zero and even putting some of the onus on the community for their part in being responsible for Vision Zero. So the dialogue is ongoing. It's something that happens on a daily basis, because we recognize the fact that while we would like to see better numbers as far as our reduction in fatalities, it's going to take a paradigm shift, not only from us internally, because we went so many years where we were unable to enforce speed because of the surveys.
Right.
Now that the surveys are back up.
So we'll have a full year in January of data based on the new speed surveys.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's internally getting our officers to making that push that we need to enforce speed, because these are the things that are going to save lives. And then also making that paradigm shift in our community so they understand, because we have people that are just not following the law, so there has to be some repercussion. My goal is to make sure that when people are driving around, they fear that if I don't follow the rules, I'm going to get a citation, which sometimes some people, that's what they need to make that shift. So it's a process. We're trying to be very thoughtful in how we utilize the hours that were given to us to get the most bang for our buck, and we want to see that zero number in 2025 as well.
Yeah. So how have you, now that we have the speed surveys completed, now that we're continue to collect data, particularly among areas where we know there's been the high injury networks where we've implemented new Vision Zero strategies, what has been the follow-up conversation working in concert with the Department of Transportation to better align LAPD's overtime resources to helping to actually address where we're seeing those greatest spikes, and what adjustments might need to be made?
So we meet regularly with Department of Transportation. There is a monthly Vision Zero core meeting, which Lieutenant Ferry, that works for me as the Department Vision Zero coordinator, he attends that meeting. If I don't have other meetings, I'm there as well. So there's always a representation from LAPD. And our joint efforts are discussed at that meeting. So there's folks from the mayor's office there. Their engineers are at that meeting. So we talk about the things that we're doing, what we're seeing. They talk about ongoing projects. They collaborate and get impact from us as far as different intersections that they want to do engineering changes. Something as simple as I went out one night to West Traffic, and as I was driving down Venice, I noticed that it was very dark, and we had an issue with pad fatals on that street. I was able to call one of my colleagues at DOT and told them there were some engineering issues. Besides the lighting, there was overgrown foliage from the trees, where at Venice and Hauser you couldn't see the stoplight. And initially we went back and forth with emails, and they're working on rectifying that matter right now. So we meet regularly in subsections to deal with our emerging issue with scooters. So there is great collaboration between the two departments, and we all have each other's cell phone numbers, so it's not difficult to make a cell phone call to say this is an issue that's going on, whether it needs to be taken care of from their end from an engineering standpoint or our end from a enforcement standpoint. So there's ongoing communication, and I think it's pretty seamless.
Okay. Colleagues, Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this motion, and thank you, Commander, for this discussion and report, this verbal report. In getting to where we understand the spike in fatalities a little more, I'm interested in some of the investigation results. Once you file a report and you determine who was at fault and who wasn't at fault. Now, many years ago, it was a real eye-opener when we learned that at that time that most of the incidents involving fatalities with pedestrians and drivers, that it was determined that the pedestrians were at fault more often than the motorists. What does that look like now, especially with the high concentration of distracted driving with phones and distracted walking with all sorts of gadgetry? In your investigation reports, do you make note of those types of distractions?
Yes, sir. That issue is still the same. Obviously, we have an issue with pedestrian fatals citywide. Actually, it's a national problem. And I recently put together a fact sheet for Department of Transportation because I'm attempting to have them fund a new program. My goal is to have them fund a banner campaign. I want to try something different. The way we advertise for some of the social events in the city, I'd like to see them put up banners to alert our pedestrians as well as the drivers on the areas that are safe to walk. Because when we looked at it, just for Central Traffic Division, 61% of our pedestrian fatals, the ped was outside the crosswalk. For West Traffic, 31% of the time in those ped fatals, the ped was outside the crosswalk. Valley Traffic, 70%, ma'am, you're in the valley. The ped was outside the crosswalk. And South Traffic, 35% of the time when we have a ped fatality.
Do you account for speed? Because you really don't have any way of knowing necessarily unless the motorist says, yes, I was driving too fast or I was driving over the speed limit. That's probably less easy to nail down.
Well, the thing is, speed is always going to be an issue in any collision you have. If you're going 5 miles an hour and you hit someone,
yeah, it's very
speed
different.
Is still an issue.
But that is the issue. So yeah.
Things that play into fact when you end up having a severe as opposed to a fatal: speed, the age of the person that was hit. When you have a younger person can take a hit better than an older person, so the older a victim, the more likelihood you are to have a fatal collision.
Of course, and I'm very aware of all that. I was just, if we could figure out the correlation between speed and pedestrian collisions, even when the pedestrian is outside of the crosswalk. And I'm just thinking aloud here. I don't know that we're going to have a way of being able to track that.
So my hypothesis, and I can't prove this, but I think with the advent of all the devices that folks are carrying, and because one of the things whenever we have a fatal, my folks are tasked with looking to see if there are any engineering issues at play, because we want to correct them immediately. So when they make a notification to me, besides giving me the details of what happened, they're also required to let me know whether there are any engineering issues at play. So when I hear these, I'm like, how do you not see a ped in a crosswalk, especially if it's in the daytime? Oftentimes, people aren't going to admit to us whether they were utilizing a device. But in the case we had the 2 young girls who were struck in a crosswalk, we had a driver that was utilizing a device. So we can't always prove that, but my guess is people are distracted. They're doing things in their vehicle, shaving, eating, talking on the phone, doing things that they should be doing instead of just concentrating on driving.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Yeah, Commander Lewis, we have a project where it's like a road diet where we put the bike lanes, and we've been waiting for a report. Is there a possible way to get, it's great streets on Reseda between, I think it's Prairie and Parthenia.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time.
Sorry, it's a great streets program on Reseda Boulevard between Prairie and Parthenia. Well, it's meant for pedestrian and bicycle safety. It seems like we've had a lot more accidents of pushing the cars out into the streets. Is it possible to get like a report back on? We've been waiting, to see.
I will check with the folks on DOT. I know that the increasing of the bike lanes on Reseda was supposed to happen. That's one of the next projects they're working on. But I'll reach out to them for that.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Rue, you're fine. Well, thank you so much, Commander. We appreciate just providing all of this information. I know this is going to be an ongoing dialogue. This is, unfortunately, a city like Los Angeles having the coexistence of pedestrians, bicyclists. This is going to be part of our ongoing conversation, and of course, with the intention of achieving the goals of Vision Zero. We want to make sure that we are all taking a part of helping to support those efforts and implement them, and making sure that we're aligning the resources that are being made available also for the enforcement pieces that will help to slow down some of the individuals that are committing those infractions, but also working to, collect that data that's going to be insightful for the Department of Transportation, for the police department, to make sure that we are doing all that we can to make our streets safer for everyone. We've seen, just in the last 6 months, we've seen a significant spike in Foothill Division in my district, where whether it's equestrian, pedestrian, bicyclists, we've seen it all. And making sure that we're aligning our resources very thoughtfully to address that, making sure that the divisions are also taking ownership of that is very important. I had that conversation with my local captain on that when we were going over some of the most recent numbers. I want to make sure that it's all kind of incorporated as all of our missions in addressing the concerns as it relates to Vision Zero and creating safer streets in our neighborhoods. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Colleagues, I want to move to hold this item in committee and ask that we have you come back in 6 months with a progress report on how we are aligning these resources and how we're addressing some of the statistics as it relates to updates for Vision Zero.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have, where are we? Okay, so we have on items, we're going to bring up items 2 and 3 together.
Okay. Item 2, Emergency Management Department report and response to motion, Bond and Koretz, relative to reporting on routine testing of the Notify LA system, and after action report on the evacuation drill in the Mandeville Canyon neighborhood in Brentwood. Item number 3 is a motion, Rodriguez-Bonin, relative to the potential uses of Bluetooth mesh network mobile applications for communication during an emergency that impacts cell and internet service.
Thank you very much. Oh, we did, okay. Good afternoon, gentlemen. My apologies, we do have a speaker card, so we will go ahead and just call those up. Give me a second. We have Red Chief. I don't see Red Chief. And Mr. Spindler.
Good afternoon, pigs. So is this on 2 items together or
Yes.
1? Well, how come I'm only getting a minute? I supposed to get 2 minutes in the clock.
Give him 2 minutes.
Yeah. Could you start my time over again?
No, you can continue.
No, but it counting down. I don't see it counting down. You put another minute up. So yeah, number 3. I have a problem. I see people Bluetooth meshing their asses up and down the street. Now, of course, when we had the earthquake and we had the fires, my little phone didn't work right. And I called up KABC, and they said, you know what? You're right. The city's earthquake EMS system got a defect. So maybe you can do what you did with Price Cooper Waterhouse and file some phony bullshit class action lawsuit against the developer of that technology. Oh, hold on. I have a phone call. Yes? Oh, it's from the FBI. They said, bad idea. So that's what the problem here is. You see, all of your shit is improperly designed, improperly maintained, improperly deployed, because the city does not run as a proper business model. It runs on a corruption scale of 15 big, huge grizzly bears digging their way in there every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday to grab as much money as they can for them, their friends, their prostitute chauffeurs, and others blackmailing them. So what we need to do is we need an intervention by the FBI, and the FBI needs to indict the city, revoke its charter, and make this an unincorporated area so we can go to the Board of Supervisors
Okay, thank you very much,
and
Mr.
speak
Spindler.
like humans. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon. I'm Rob Freeman, Assistant General Manager for the city's Emergency Management Department. I'm joined here today also by my General Manager, Aram Sahakian. And
Corey Pelk, Operations West Bureau. Good afternoon, Captain Vic Davalos, West Los Angeles Community Police Station.
Ted Ross, General Manager with the Information Technology Agency.
Thank you. So, colleagues, I actually called both these items together because it's with respect to emergency notification, and I wanted to invite Ted to join the conversation because of some emerging technology that is being utilized, and just for broader context and conversation, how that might be considered given some of what we've discovered in the testing most recently of our Notify LA and some of our early notification systems, where messages weren't reaching all affected parties. This is something that we've been advocating very strongly with residents to subscribe and to participate in, and we know that in large-scale emergencies, some of our systems that are instrumental in supporting those networks and that communication will sometimes fail. And so given those concerns, again, what are some of the other opportunities in emerging technology that can be reviewed for consideration and implementation, introduction into some of our early notification processes? So with that, Aram, do you want to?
Yes, I would jump in on that, and I'll take that question. And you are absolutely correct. By no means this is a perfect system. And not only locally, we're seeing it around the country where it's reaching 50 to 60% of the population. And it is also dependent on power. So if DWP or PG&E or Southern California Edison decides to cut the power to an area because of high winds, well, guess what? Those repeaters are dead. WIA does not work. It's as simple as that. So we need more than one tool in our quiver to be able to reach out our population, including going back to mechanical sirens, which we are looking at, battery operated, where, if maybe when you hear a siren, then you need to go to your car and turn on your AM radio so you can get further instructions. We have also applied to the Mayor's Innovation Fund, and we did receive a couple of $100,000. We're working with ham operators, those are amateur radio operators, to design a system that's a solar Wi-Fi system. The way it works is these are basically radar dishes that have direct sight distance communicating with each other. They're solar powered, they'll be installed on trailers, and they will create a Wi-Fi network where they are deployed. And if the pilot project works, we are planning to ask for additional funding for the Mountain Fire District so we can permanently install these solar powered units. The way it works, you will have an app on your phone. You'll click on the app. It says Join Emergency Wi-Fi Network. When it's activated, and you join that. In addition to that, there's absolutely the Bluetooth network that's being used in uprising all over the globe. It has its challenges, and I'm going to have Ted speak to that.
Certainly. Ted Ross, General Manager of the Information Technology Agency. So to help demystify, a Bluetooth mesh network is a messaging app that really uses Bluetooth low energy technology to be able to communicate from one individual's phone to one or several other phones. The way it works is as long as a phone is within about 75 feet of another phone, it's going to leverage their Bluetooth to make that communication. And it can do what they say up to 127 hops. So if I'm trying to communicate to Aram, I could actually jump off of multiple phones to get to Aram eventually in that communication, and to do it without a cellular network. So really what the importance of this conversation is, if there was not a cellular network, it is a potential method, a very progressive one I might add, to be able to communicate to a large number of people, so long as their phones are in a fairly condensed area, which sometimes is applicable in LA and sometimes less so. Currently, it's for small types of messages. It's being used often in things like medical equipment, exercise equipment, and lighting systems inside very sophisticated buildings. It's certainly an innovative conversation how to use it for emergency notifications, but of course, as we've been seeing with Hong Kong protesters, with groups of people who are concerned about the Chinese government stopping communications over the internet and limiting their communications, this effectively becomes a shadow network that, regardless of cellular connectivity or even censorship, they are communicating among protesters using a BridgeFi app, the Fire Chat app, as well as some others. We have meetings set up with EMD. We've also got interviews set up with industry experts to get a better understanding. No other city, to my knowledge, has such a type of Bluetooth mesh network. But when it comes to the importance of disaster communications and emergency communications, and in Los Angeles, a disaster and emergency is not a once every 10-year conversation. It's certainly a every other month, or certainly multiple times a year at the very least, conversation, as we see year in and year out for the last several years. So we're working with EMD and other industry experts to help vet the technology as well as other technologies to ensure and try to maximize communications when people need it most.
Yeah, and if I might add, that initial warning that needs to go out in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping and not everybody's paying attention to their cell phones maybe, it has to be a siren-based warning, a mechanical system that is not dependent on electricity. And we're seeing this. I mean, I'm discussing this with 15 other big city emergency managers, and we're all looking into that direction because it is so critical. It's a moment's notice, and we can't rely on a system that's power-based at this point, especially knowing that the electrical companies, they're cutting power because of high winds.
Well, what intrigued me, and the reason why I introduced the motion on the mesh technology and ascertaining whether or not this could be applicable to us, is I even remember 20 some odd years ago, even when we had these analog phone networks at home, this old school telephone, which during the Northridge earthquake was unusable because the lines going down and the overloading the system. Now that everyone has migrated to cellular technology, the same collapse and an overload of a system that doesn't always have the bandwidth to support the usage amongst a large group of individuals all at the same time. They saw it during September 9/11 in New York. We know that the bandwidth is not going to sustain the needs in an emergency situation, notwithstanding the fact that if and when we lose power to support these cellular networks, we need to consider what other options are available. And the fact that everyone has these devices, how might we look to a more progressive system to outwardly channel information, emergency information, evacuation information that is applicable to the individuals in these areas? And so I was very intrigued by the utilization of this technology in Hong Kong, making sure that what we could consider in tapping into something like that, I think, is incredibly innovative, and as a method of not relying on a cellular network or any of the communication tools that we've had before, but leveraging the technology that exists in every single telephone, every single vehicle. Every car, every phone is now wired with this Bluetooth technology that is not dependent on a cellular network. And that, to me, is something that makes it far more accessible for individuals, especially when we don't have to rely on a network all being operational, that everyone has the same quality and level of service. It equals the playing field for residents in an emergency situation. And so I know this is, again, and Ted, I want to thank you because I know you've taken the bull by the horns on this and starting these conversations. But I think it's important. I know that when we recognize the evacuation efforts and our ability to communicate in residents in a very timely fashion, particularly when going to just the Saddle Ridge fire most recently, people were in bed, they were asleep, had no idea that a fire had jumped the 5 freeway into Mr. Lee's area. And you had to evacuate yourself.
Well, we had the problem with our area, and I understand that's not a perfect system. Cell towers go down. The whole north part of Granada Hills didn't get any type of messaging. And so I understand it's not anyone's fault, but just wondering, especially on the hillside, if they could get an earlier notification, just alerting people until obviously the technology that we're talking about is working. I think just to prepare them of like, hey, there is a fire, and in this general area, fires move quickly. Be aware, cell towers go down, and these systems aren't perfect.
Yeah, and absolutely, and we can only send that type of a messaging using Notify LA and not the WIA network. The WIA network is controlled by FEMA, by the federal government, and it has to be a fire life safety situation. In other words, the fire's coming your way,
Right.
Evacuate right now. But to give them the heads up, we use Notify LA to be legal and to be within FCC guidelines. Well, not everybody's registered. Not everybody is part of it. Now, having said that, I absolutely agree with you that we need to have another effort through maybe the media to get the word out. Red flag day, high winds, prepare to evacuate just in case. We need to give them that heads up. The other thing is that, unfortunately, there's a trend where people, when they're getting their cellular phones, they're dropping their landlines. They're canceling their landlines. Right now, our recommendation is, if you live in a mountain fire district, please do not disconnect your landline, because if cell communication is dead, your phone still will ring if you have a hard line, if you have a copper line. So that's something else that will be part of our outreach message.
Well, can I ask a question? Because a lot of it is voice over IP now. When we talk about what those old lines were, they're not the old lines of that analog system, that copper line. So when you say that, my question is that true to form? Because that's still, oftentimes, those landlines are based on cable systems, cable networks. Sorry, Ted, I hate to put you on the spot, but is that, I'm not sure. Would that be accurate that they would still be vulnerable even if they had?
They're likely internet-based now. So if you ask the average person, say, get a landline at home, they would go through their cable provider, their internet provider, to get that. The copper lines are increasingly expensive, and back in 2013, the phone companies had stated that
did away with them.
By 2020 they expect to get rid of it.
Right.
And so those POTS lines are increasingly rare. Unfortunately, from a disaster support side. I think, but fortunately, to look on the other side, the means to communicate with people has dramatically increased. And so television, radio, social media, there's a long list of ways. It makes it more complicated because you're trying to get one message over many different mediums. And to Arm's point, worst case scenario, physical means also add to that, because there are plenty of people, they're usually not teenagers, but there's plenty of people who turn their phone off or set it aside when it's time to go to bed or move it to another room. But there are, on the plus side, there's a lot of people who are unhealthily connected to their devices.
You're talking to several people here that are unhealthily connected to their devices.
And one on this microphone, too. Because some of the people behind those benches call me at early hours, and I get it. But the reality is there are people who, while unhealthy from a societal perspective, is healthy for crisis communications. If you can get a message out, and if it's through the right kind of channels that are still working, of course, in that situation, then you have more options today than you've ever had before to communicate with people. But it does require more planning on the city side. It requires multi-channel communications, because just one doesn't do it anymore. And so it's getting the right message out at the right time to the right people through channels that they could start to accept and receive. And so we're big fans of EMD. We're big fans of PD and fire and public safety. They're extremely important as a group of people when it comes to the operations that they do and what it means to our city. And certainly the ITA will provide any assistance and will be right there involved to assist wherever possible to come up with multi-channel communications so that we can get the messages out. There's been a lot of improvements with this last fire. When it came to on the website side, we had much more content out much earlier. That was very accessible and very easy to use. We had it on social media, had it in a lot of different areas. So I think there certainly have been some improvements, I think, over the last year specifically. I think Skirball gave us a good run for its money, and Skirball and Creek, and so I think a lot of improvements have been coming. I've been seeing it when it comes to the communication side. But obviously it can never be good enough, because when it comes to people's life and their property and protecting them and their animals, really the city always has to do a fantastic job year in and year out regarding that, and there's never such a thing as saying we've arrived or done it well enough.
Thank you. And so, Arm, I want to dig a little deeper on the report that was provided and the drill that was piloted in Mandeville Canyon. I know that was the impetus for Mr. Bonin's motion, and that 30% of the individuals that had signed up for the Notify LA system did not receive the test notification. Has there been any insight as to what the challenges were with that particular?
Absolutely, and maybe Rob can touch on that, but very quickly, the challenges are, like Councilmember Lee said, cell tower location and communication, and weather factors. If you have a low ceiling of clouds, if you have a foggy situation, the signal doesn't really communicate. That's one. So climate challenges, cell tower challenges. I mean, right after that incident, we received, dozens of phone calls, people telling us, forget the emergency, on a daily basis. At home, I don't have reception. I can't talk on my phone. Can you please have the phone company install another cell tower? Well, we obviously can't do that, but if we do that in an emergency situation, that's going to assist us. The other thing that happened, we weren't able to send a WIA message because it needs an FCC waiver. So we did a Notify LA communication, and you will receive it only if you're registered. So 30% of those received it. And Rob, if you can touch on some of the other challenges.
Thank you, Aram. Definitely with each of these uses, we do an after-action report. So the report submitted to committee is similar in that format. What were the numbers? What worked? What didn't work? We certainly want to do increased tests of the emergency alert system, of these systems. So one of the things we did is in August we did a retest for Mandeville Canyon, and we had significantly better results. And we've had an opportunity, as Ted was saying, to actually use Notify LA and Wireless Emergency Alert for recent fire events. And I think we're headed in the right direction, but we need increased tests. We need to try to get more people registered. We need to improve the messaging reach, and then we need to look at new technology. Even between Saddle Ridge and Palisades, we made some improvements. Sometimes it's a deep dive into reports that the Everbridge system provides us on who got what, where were the gaps, and we identified a couple of things that we're going to need to resolve with FEMA, who administers the WIA system. There's a few capabilities that were not enabled for LA that we're going to be working with FEMA in terms of the categories of the alerts. But each of these activities has been an opportunity for us to measure how effective it's been and move forward. And I think we've made some significant improvements in our staff's use of the system in coordination with police and fire.
And our plan is to test every mountain fire district throughout the city and see what's the coverage, where we're failing, and to improve it. And we will continue doing that. And finally, I think we're holding hands with FCC, because the first couple of times we did it despite being told don't do it. So I said, I'm going to take responsibility because I need to do it. And now they realize that they really need to do it because the system is not a perfect system. And to be fair to them, they're also looking into improving the system. Right now, you're limited to 90 characters only. They don't use geolocation, which means that the signal will bounce all over the place. We had one instance where the airport used the WIA messaging, and they received it up in Fresno. So the signal bounced all the way, through the repeaters to Fresno. So that's being worked on, and hopefully in November all that will change. Obviously, there's some pushback from the providers when it comes to geolocation because they don't want to provide that information because of privacy, but they were mandated by the federal government to do so. So that has changed.
Our next exercise test will be on November 16th, and we've received FCC permission to do a full WIA test for that event. For now, it's probably going to require us to go through that process each time we want to do the test, unlike a real event. But I think we'll be able to have even a better indication of how effective some of these adjustments have been. We take it very seriously. We've increased our staff training and the number of people that are knowledgeable about how to issue the alert. We're developing even more airtight procedures with our partners in police and fire as to getting the direction from the command post and getting the alert out immediately, and what the follow-up alerts are going to be. Tying into social media, so the alert would not only give pertinent information with character limits, but pointing folks to fire department or EMD website information where things could be done on a constantly refreshed, constantly updated basis. I think we did a lot better job of publishing real-time evacuation map information off our SALAS application for Palisades. And the feedback that we got through social media for the Palisades use of Notify LA was much more positive. So I think it's trending in the right direction. November 16th will be another test.
Hollywood Hills.
In Hollywood Hills. And we're standing ready to use the system for real throughout fire season.
One statistic, if you don't mind, I'd like to add, I think that was really astounding. During Screwballing Creek, we published a map in partnership with EMD and Fire Department that had over 3.5 million views in 36 hours. Tremendous amount of consumption. I don't have the statistics of what we've been using with SALAS for the recent Saddle Ridge one. Like I said, while not perfect, these were crisis maps showing evacuation areas, showing fire location, etc., that were heavily consumed. So I think a cross-channel approach in which you're effectively using social media, websites, Notify LA, WIA, I mean, all these items, not to over-communicate, or I should say to over-inundate, but to communicate effectively and to reach all these different segments so that every population has a chance to be informed, to know where to access information. For folks like myself who lived in Koreatown, we're largely quote-unquote unaffected, but we feel for it. It's those in the hillsides and up north, my gosh, it must be a traumatic experience that we could certainly empathize and appreciate even though we're not there. And so there's some groups of people who have family members up there who want to know where to get more information and how to communicate with them. There's others who are directly affected. There are others who have animals and you know where those animals go. And so we can certainly appreciate the challenges required, but we also know that we now have so many different kinds of tools, and we're now going to be looking at even more progressive tools such as Bluetooth mesh networks, etc., to see what more we can add to the arsenal and deliver timely, informative messages to all the people who need to be receiving it.
And if I may, another project we're working on, and we will bring it to the committee. You will need to visit our facility so we can showcase it to you. We are putting together a broadcast center inside the Emergency Operations Center. And during an emergency, just to describe it roughly, we will have a large 85-inch screen. You will have public information officers in front of it from fire, police, it could be DOT, EMD. And just like during the elections, you see on CNN TV going through the precincts and what have you, these PIOs basically will have a map discussing the fire line, shelters, what routes to take to the evacuation centers. It will be broadcasted using the city's Channel 6, and it will be basically, the signal will be sent to all other media channels. This is something that we're almost ready to launch. We're doing a couple of tests. During EOC activations, the broadcast center will be up and running, and you guys also will have a chance to come and speak to your constituency from this broadcast center.
So that would be in lieu of doing the on-site posts that are currently being utilized from the command posts?
I wouldn't say it's in lieu, it's in addition to. It's something that's broadcasted on Channel 6.
Got it. Colleagues, did you have any questions? No? We're good? Okay, well, thank you very much. This is an ongoing conversation. I know Mr. Bonin, as well, given the most recent activity in his district, had some additional concerns. I think the after report of that, the evacuation efforts and what ensued as part of these most recent events. We want to go ahead and continue this item for 30 days, especially to allow additional time to come back with what options might be available with as it relates to the mesh network as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate your work.
Thank you so
much. And we will continue this item, or these items rather. And let's see, do we have still, hold on, I think we still had public comment. Oh, we've cleared it all. Okay. So thank you very much. We are adjourned.